Americans have read it. What is something non-Americans will never get? Story 1. Apparently, how much we value our individuality and autonomy, and the fact that we trust the general citizenry more than we trust our government. After spending many years in the US and getting citizenship, I understand what this means, but I grew up in the UK and was already an individualist, so the US was natural for me. Story 2. Root beer. Almost every foreigner will just say it tastes like toothpaste. Hey, I take offense to this. I love root beer, and you can find some more natural versions of it than the big brands. I'm sure you can find something to appeal to a non-American palate. Story 3. If you or a loved one has been diagnosed with mesothelioma, you may be entitled to compensation. Story 4. Paris is around 1,500 miles from Moscow. Los Angeles is around 2,500 miles from New York. The reason many Americans do not have a passport or speak a foreign language is that we barely have enough time to explore our own country. What y'all in Europe call traveling to another country, we call commuting to work. Yeah, I'd have to agree with that one. I've been able to travel to other countries, and it's amazing how much less travel you have to do to get somewhere completely different. But it also makes me wish the United States had a better railroad system. I would love to travel in the US on the type of rail system Japan or China has. Story 5. Not American, but I'll chime in anyways. To you Americans, something non-Americans will never understand. Biscuits and gravy. None of us will ever understand your love of country gravy. Originally, gravy was a British thing, but it was real, homemade gravy, not the stuff you get in the stores and fast food places in the US today. The so-called biscuits were inspired by British scones, I think, which never had any connection with gravy. To each his own weirdness. Story 6. Muscle cars. Going fast in a straight line developed because of the size of the country and lots of straight lines everywhere. Why is my car cammed and goes womp, 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 womp? Because I don't want it to. Story 7. We call ourselves Americans because there is no good alternative to refer to our citizens. We know that the USA is not the only country in the Americas, but what else do you want us to call ourselves? USians? Stations? Well, I've heard people refer to themselves according to their state, like Californians, Oregonians, New Yorkers, etc. But if you tell someone in another country that, you just get a lot of blank stares. Even if we called ourselves North Americans, you'd still have to clarify whether you're from the US or Canada. Story 8. The US government will prevent its citizens from having their rights violated overseas. Example, Amanda Knox. She was found guilty, then it was overturned, and she was found not guilty. She came home. Italy issued an arrest warrant for her, and the DOJ refused to comply on the grounds of double jeopardy. Can't be tried for the same crime twice. Story 9. Lots of idioms that are specific to the US. I was talking to a South African friend and casually tossed out the phrase, came out swinging, and he looked at me like I was from another planet. This obviously happens even more for non-native speakers. My German teacher told us a story about how he had tried to use the phrase, the big cheese, in German. He was cleaning up the apartment he lived in because his boss was coming over. When asked why by his German roommate, he said, Die große Käse kommen. The German had no idea why the American was preparing for a large shipment of cheese. There's a great cartoon called Symphony of Slang, directed by the animation genius Tex Avery. Look it up. Where a man talks only in slang and it's all illustrated literally. Watch that and you might get an idea of how American slang sounds to a non-American. I can sympathize. Story 10. This may be a narrow response, but I don't think they'll ever understand the intricacies of Protestantism in the southeastern US. So many subsects and not even over-important doctrinal things. We are talking split churches over the color of the carpet or the accepted role of the youth pastor, not to mention the swag has over public policies. It's one of those topics that I could rant on for a few hours. A few years back, my grandparents' church had a huge argument over having chairs or pews in the church. Story 11. College sports, especially football and to an extent basketball. I'd possibly lump that in with how people feel about their respective universities. The apparel, the home decor, the license plates. People are really proud of where they went to school and their athletic program is good, then there you go. People may not realize Michigan's football stadium is the same size, if not bigger, than frickin' Camp Nou. I don't fully understand the US schools' obsession with sports. How many kids in the US grow up to become professional athletes? Story 12. While we can't make guns illegal overnight in America, studying in Norway currently, land out the rural followers and have met way too many friends who seem to think Americans would willfully hand guns over to the government because they said so. That's hilarious. Americans are predisposed to distrust our government. The idea of trusting that one's government will do what is best if left alone is laughable over here. Yeah, we have the freedom to really lay into our government over here and say that we completely distrust them. I think even people who are against guns in this country would be suspicious if the government just decided everyone had to hand them all over. Story 13. United States is big, and a lot of areas just don't have sidewalks or managed bike lanes, so a car is very needed and in similar locations are 100% necessity. Also, locations are much further away. Like, I am not that far from New York City, but I still need to drive one way about 45 minutes till I hit the mall to go shopping. Story 14. The real sound a tornado makes as it goes over your trailer park. It doesn't sound like a freight train, more like a B-1 bomber at full afterburn. That's awesome, but I don't think I'd ever want to hear one close up and personal. The power of nature is amazing, though. Story 15. Chili and Fritos to make Frito pie for the Austrians. I visited a while back and it absolutely blew their mind that anyone would even think of combining the two. Chili by itself was also pretty far out there for them too, but they at least tried it. That is just the tip of the iceberg of American home cooking. We have a tradition of using chips and dip and candy as the beginning ingredients of our dishes. I'm sure if you look at TikTok, you can find some of the more outrageous examples. And if you really want to go down a rabbit hole, look up deep fried anything. Story 16. When an American says I'm Irish, they are not saying I am a citizen of Ireland. Story 17. The game, were those fireworks or gunshots? Hey, some people try hunting with fireworks. Yes, you can't always tell the difference unless you have a good ear for identifying the difference. Story 18. It's my money and I need it now. Call J.G. Wentworth, 877 cash now. I actually had to look this one up myself. It's more of an East Coast thing than West Coast. Basically, it's a well-known commercial for a company that wants to give you a lump sum cash settlement for some settlement you have that's paying you over time. I can't think of a West Coast company that's just as popular about this kind of thing. The commercial is funny, though. Story 19. I've heard a Canadian rant about the fact that we often say, as a response to thank you instead of you're welcome. You thought of it as snobby and rude when in reality it is the equivalent of saying, of course. Story 20. Brit abroad. I once saw Walmart selling a frozen turkey with a 6-pack of Miller Lite, I think, taped around it as some kind of Super Bowl special or something. I'm not one for generalization, but that one made me chuckle. That's what some other countries would call typical American vulgar humor ideas. Story 21. The sheer vast size and the lack of trains. I had a friend from England get all excited about coming to visit America because he thought he would be able to tour around and visit all of his American online friends. I felt so bad telling him that driving from California to Georgia isn't exactly a clear day trip. My girlfriend has a lab mate from the Netherlands who said he wanted to take his family from Wisconsin to Montana to see the mountains. It shouldn't be a long trip. It's basically one road the whole way. That road is Interstate 90, and it is the longest interstate in the U.S. at just under 5,000 kilometers end to end. Don't worry though, Wisconsin to West Montana is only measly half that. Again, there's a lot to explore in America, but I really wish we had better trains. Having said that, there are some Americans who don't mind making long trips like that as long as they have good company in the car. But with gas prices these days, I fear Americans are in danger of becoming more fractured and traveling becomes more prohibited. Story 21. This applies to really every group of people, but it still isn't understood somehow that there are plenty of rational Americans who are no different than anyone else in the world who stay informed with the events in the world. The American stereotypes and outlaws make the news and movies. The normal ones just live their lives anonymously. Story 22. American living in Europe. Apparently peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. It blows my coworkers' minds why anyone would eat that. Meanwhile, they're eating butter and jelly sandwiches like that's not weird. Well, it does taste pretty good, but I'm not sure about the jelly since in Europe it's jam, not jelly, which is not really spreadable. Story 23. How amazing true barbecue over a smoker is. Top tier brisket is honestly one of the best foods known to mankind. Smoked pulled pork is the only food that can make my mouth water on thought. Yes, we'll make food with chili and Fritos, but that smoked barbecue will make you a believer in American cuisine again. Just the aroma alone is enough to turn you into a believer. Story 24. There are some really top notch beers in America. They just aren't at 7-Eleven. The crappy beers are the ones everyone knows because they are made cheaply by huge companies that can afford to advertise the freak out of them. Most of the good beers don't have much at all in the way of advertisement in the US and seem to rely mostly on word of mouth. Story 25. Our country rose to power in a shockingly small amount of time and was built by certain people who also rose from nothing to everything. People like Carnegie and Rockefeller. Because of this, there is pressure on people to make it big quick and be constantly concerned with going awesome in college. So you can get that amazing career. So you can get rich, so you can get that big house and lifestyle you want. I might be wrong that people in other countries just seem so much more content with living a smaller life, which I think is cool. There's that pressure, sure. There also used to be that kind of thing in America. We called it the American dream, and it was also known as middle class. Nowadays, it seems like that middle area of living is harder to achieve in today's financial climate. So the pressure now is basically go big or go poor. Story 26. Taxes. They aren't included in the price tag because taxes vary depending on where you are, and companies want to be able to advertise a single price across different states and cities. Story 27. Probably the sheer size of the country, unless you're from Russia, Canada, China, or somewhere else of comparable size. The idea that you can't drive to the Grand Canyon from New York City in a day will likely be difficult to grasp at first. How to explain to someone at Niagara Falls that they can't see New York City from there? The US is truly massive for sure. Most people outside it can't fathom just how large a US state can be. Story 28. Pretty much every single British person I've met since moving to England thinks that Route 66 still exists as a whole. They don't know that only small pieces of it exist only as a tourist attraction, and that you can no longer drive across the country on it. I tell them to take Interstate 70 as a replacement and they're not interested. Blows my mind. I think it's due to that one song, Route 66, that continues the legend. I love that song. However, I prefer the version by Depeche Mode that they mash up with Behind the Wheel. Story 29. If your dirty laundry got as much international news media attention, your country would look like a bunch of arrogant, homophobic racists too. Story 30. Why we call people African Americans and Asian Americans or any other weird thing. We are all Americans. I've never heard of an African German or Asian Englishman. Different groups, races of people have different tendencies and ideas quite often, so this helps identify that. It's not meant to be racist. It's the same as saying male or female. Outside the US, most of us don't have issues with that, including people of different races. Story 31. Just because we use imperial units of measure does not mean we don't understand metric units. We use both regularly. Personally, I would happily give up imperial units for metric. I was taught metric growing up, and it is so much simpler to understand. I know that so much stuff relies on old measurements, but I really wish we could just move forward with metric only. Story 32. You'll never get to win the World Series of Baseball even if your country plays it. Other than a couple of Canadian teams, we don't invite outsiders to the World Championships. Story 33. There are 50 states, not 52. Yes, I'm sure. Really? I'm sure. You're thinking of playing cards? Have you memorized all the states in the US? 50 is a lot to remember. Some are much larger than others, too. Story 34. Free refills, and not just on soda. French fries, chips, ice cream, salad greens, breadsticks, meat. If it's served, someone has free refills of it. That is something I've noticed when traveling to other countries. Refills are very much an American thing. The one that blows me away is that sometimes water refills aren't free. I can understand food and soda, but water? Story 35. Please don't call me Yank. I'm from Louisiana and that is just insulting. I'm a New Yorker living in the South. When I was in London and got called a Yankee, I didn't even realize it was someone referring to me as American and not as a Northerner. Story 36. just how fun a day of shooting things in the country can be. There's nothing like gathering up the old TVs, maybe an old car, a little bit of tannerite, and a few friends with their arsenals to come out and have a shootout. I don't hunt. I don't think I need a gun for protection, but dang, are they fun to shoot. It's funny because that's something that even many Americans don't understand. For those of us from other countries, the American obsession with guns and hunting for sport is extremely odd, to say the least, though being able to defend oneself is important. Story 37. Why we do things the way we do and get peed off when people either try to tell us what to do or say, why don't you do it like other country? With zero attempts understanding our history and culture. As much as Americans get crap on from not understanding the rest of the world, plenty of international people I've met don't know much of the US beyond the current news either. Understanding is a two-way street. I'm sure it's a bit of backlash from the US having a lot of power and intruding on a lot of other countries military-wise. But the average American doesn't have any say in that. Please try and ask us about what we're doing rather than just say we're doing it wrong. Story 39. The US has distinct regional cultures in addition to a national culture. Try the regional cuisine when you come visit and don't think that all we eat is hamburgers and hot dogs. I am native New Yorker, and when I travel to different parts of the country, I treat it like I'm visiting another country. For example, I research the local or regional speciality and then look for the best places to eat it. Story 40. V8 engines and really big trucks. Big trucks with mud tires are stupid and a waste of time and money. Put person behind the wheel of a V8 mud truck. Oh crap, this is fun as frick. I agree, what exactly is so great about riding in mud anyways? But the ATV riding obsession is also rather pointless and a waste. It's also very habitat destructive, noisy, and polluting. Story 41. That there is a difference in culture, values, food, or appearance. I had someone legitimately try to tell me that someone from Boston will be exactly the same as someone from BFE, Louisiana, and that person will be the same as someone from Seattle, and that person will be no different than an Amish lady from Lancaster. Those are four people who quite literally have nothing in common with each other. I once watched a video about the different accents of England and how different those areas are and the people. There's a lot of them, and England isn't nearly the size of America. So it's bonkers when someone thinks all Americans are going to be the same. Story 42. S'mores, and in a lot of places, mac and cheese. My Finnish friend had her first s'more when she was 17 and without graham crackers. So is it even a s'more? She also thought that mac and cheese was only something she imagined until she was like 15. Story 43. Suburbia. In the post-World War II baby boom and economic upswing, the U.S. began a process of moving from cities to suburbs. Levittown was founded in 1947 outside of New York City and became the model for this kind of living. People flocked to it, particularly the affluent white people who drive American culture. Levittown itself was restricted to Caucasians. I think that many cultural differences that non-Americans are wowed by come from this period. The insulated individualism of Americans comes from selling cheap houses to individual families rather than large-scale apartment buildings. This necessitated a car culture which fit back on itself. The suburbs took over farmland, so food growing needed to be centralized in the Midwestern states. That meant long-haul trucking, which meant more paved highways and ultimately the interstate highway system, which was also a civil defense structure for when the Russians invaded. This is why so many Americans can't drive standard transmission cars, because the model here is that the majority of a commute is on the highway. Even the red plastic cup that always comes up on discussion threads, something that fascinates tourists in the US, owes itself to suburbia. When an American family wants to get together with other families rather than go out to a public park, they'll invite everyone to one house. With so many people, it doesn't make sense to use the best dishes, cups, and flatware. So disposables are much more popular. All things change, and one day these systems plans will become so very unsustainable that things will have to switch to local production again. It's time for these wasteful methods to end. Click on one of the videos on the screen now, or Karen will sue you.